look, QuickBooks really led the charge on putting bookkeeping in the business owner's hands and taking it out of the ivory tower of the accounting industry. And that I do appreciate. I love that more business owners know about bookkeeping because QuickBooks made it accessible.
Mhm.
That being said, functionally, I think that their system is more complicated than it has to be. And I know that because I use a system that is nowhere near as complicated.
Okay.
So they, I think that there are things that they could do more easily. There are funny, fickle things about the system, like the business owner's view of the dashboard and the accountant's view of the dashboard are different. So if I want to sit down and train a client on, let me show you how to reconcile your bank account and run financial statements so that you don't need me to do it, right?
Stacey,
Hi.
pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so Stacey, we've had a chat, a short chat, and then a few minutes here beforehand, and I did some research on you, and I'm impressed. Your LinkedIn profile, there's so many things you've done, and you look young. I don't know if you are young. I assume you're in your, I don't know, early 30s or
30s?
something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But for somebody that's in their early 30s, I'm very impressed with the things you've done. And I wanted to kind of touch on some of those things because you really seem to be somebody that cares a lot about other people. You do things like youth at risk and ending the silence, and then there's some other things in relationship, like not relationships, but dealing with customer relations, client relations.
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah.
keen to hear about how that relates to your business now. Um, so let's start with just a bit about Stacey. What got Stacey to where we are today.
Oh man. Well, kind of pointing to the LinkedIn page, I've done so many different things. I would call myself a jack of all trades, a Renaissance soul. I tend to get really passionately curious about something and follow the path until it leads me to something else I get passionately curious about. And then
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work in the mental health space and working with youth at risk, as you saw in there, mentoring, coaching, group facilitation. I taught English in Brazil for a month for a
Oh,
summer. I've done events and marketing. I landed on accounting about 5 years ago. I'm actually in the longest period of time I've been, on a particular path right now,
good.
and it kind of came out of nowhere. I was at the time the guy that I was dating was starting a business, and I wanted to learn how to do bookkeeping so I could help him with that side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, the bookkeeping lasted and the relationship didn't, and I was on a completely different
Oh boy.
trajectory. It was great, it was perfect. It launched me to exactly
Good.
where I wanted to go. Um, I started interning at a small business accounting firm. And within 6 months, I was a full-time staff accountant on that team. And just my love for putting numbers together and telling stories and helping clients understand how the money is flowing in and out of their company. Um, it tapped into both the creativity and the like logic and rationality that I, kind of balance both of them. Um, from there, I started to see in that position that just giving a business owner a set of numbers doesn't necessarily help them make better business decisions. For some business owners, sure, it does. If they know a lot about finance and they can read a financial statement, they can make better decisions about, how they're spending their money. But for a lot of business owners, it was sort of like putting all this work in to prepare financial statements, and then they had no idea what to do with it afterwards.
Yeah.
So what what's kind of brought me to where I'm at today, which is running my own company and doing profit coaching, was really seeing that it's more than just giving the numbers, it's teaching how to use the numbers. What questions do the numbers answer, and how can you simplify those numbers so that, a business owner who maybe doesn't consider themselves, particularly savvy with finances can
Mhm.
learn how to be really diligent and really intelligent with how they're using their money and have a really great, profitable, fun business. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's been a long and winding road for sure.
that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's a great story. And I love how it's so funny how we end up where we end up,
A
right?
hundred
Just
percent.
the ways that things happen. And um bookkeeping, how did you like that? Was that a challenge? I like because I've never done it. I would imagine it's a lot of data entry. Does that become boring?
Yeah. It
Okay.
does. It does. And it was the primary concern I had when I started that internship was like because I love, that's the thing about, kind of the way that my brain works is I love it until I master it and then I need to expand upon it or I am like out.
Yeah, I'm the same.
And with bookkeeping, it was one of those where I could see that like right now, this is awesome. I love it. But if I don't do something beyond this that gets creative and that taps into that, kind of growth mindset, it's going to get boring. And, that's really where the coaching came out of it was once I learned how to keep the books, it was like, okay, cool. Now what do I do with this knowledge? How do I
Mhm.
bring this in a new way? That said, I think something that we touched on maybe in our the first time that we chatted was around technology and how that has really helped eliminate some of the just onerous, data entry, manual input. And I work almost exclusively on Zero now with clients. Whenever I'm talking to a client who's trying to decide where to put their books, I always recommend that software because it has taken so much of the kind of like just gritty, awful part of keeping books out of it so that I actually can focus more energy on solving problems with my clients.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's made it
think
a lot more fun.
yeah, it would. And I think that's one of the greatest things about what's happening right now in the whole world of like AI and machine learning and stuff. And I'm glad you went there because that's where my head was going,
Yeah, yeah,
is that data entry part sucks. And it's not really, it's adding value, but you could be doing things that are a lot more creative and
right.
engaging, right? And I think
I mean,
that's where everything's going is where,
totally,
we can eliminate all that redundant stuff and have people doing added value stuff that they actually enjoy
completely.
doing, right?
It's
So,
like keeping books is like the brushing your teeth of business ownership. Like you
yeah.
have to do it. Everybody has to do it. It's routine maintenance,
Hmm.
but nobody wants to spend, 10 hours a week brushing their teeth. No one wants to do that. And so machine learning, AI, technology has made it so that you really can, most companies can probably do the data entry portion of their bookkeeping in as little as 30 minutes a week, as
Wow,
5 minutes a week, depending on how big your business is.
that's
And
awesome.
then having, a professional who can come behind you and do kind of the higher level accounting stuff. But, you really don't, it's made it so that it's not so much of a chore. Now, how do we make it fun? How do we make it interesting? How do we start
Yeah,
using it, you
yeah,
know, to build a cooler business,
yeah, absolutely. And I want to get to that. I want to get to the fun, exciting parts. But I want to get into a little bit of the detail, like zero. You're familiar with that?
Yeah.
Um, I'm not. I'm
Okay.
curious, what are like, how does that work from beginning to the data entry? Like, how does it all come together kind of thing so people can get a better understanding, the listeners can understand how that works instead of paper or
Yeah.
spreadsheets.
Sure, sure. So I would let me most folks that I, you know, tell about Zero, they're familiar with accounting software in some form or another. They've seen QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online, and they all work similarly as far as like the technology that allows you to keep books quickly, and that is primarily bank feeds. So bank feed is what takes the transactional data from your bank, downloads it into this software, And from there, you can just say each transaction is, this is Office Max, this was office supplies. This is, one of my cost of goods vendors, this is cost of goods. And so you transaction by transaction code the expenses that are flowing through your various accounts. And the total of how much you spent on each type of expense, is populated into your financial statements. And the difference between spreadsheets or paper and accounting software like QuickBooks and Xero is that on spreadsheets and paper, you've got to manually do all of these totaling. The software just does it for you. So once you've told the system that, we've gone to Office Max 27 times this month and we've, spent $5,000 on COGS, now you've got a profit and loss statement that shows you how much you did in income, how much of each type of expenses you've got, all of that. It keeps track for you. From there, you can make it even more simple where you can create bank rules. You can say every time I go to Office Max, just automatically code it to office expenses. So I don't need to think about it when I'm going in here doing my reconciling. And you can really, you can get so granular with it that you can actually start to, answer questions like which vendors am I spending the most on, or which revenue generating activities are giving me the highest return on investment by running different reports that are pre-built into these accounting softwares.
Okay.
So the hard part, I would say, for most business owners is knowing what information is important, when I'm sitting here looking at, I've started this piece of accounting software. I've got my bank accounts linked up to bank feeds. I've got my chart of accounts set up. So I've got my income accounts and all my different expense accounts. Now what? Now what do I do? And I think that is where, depending on your goals, you can get really creative working with a professional on, what kind of questions do you want to ask? What kind of feedback do you want to get? And let's set up your software to make it as easy and efficient as possible for you to get those answers in as few places as possible.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. So is there like a standardizing model for, because I mean, you have chart of accounts, right? And
yeah,
it seems like things get labeled differently in every business.
yeah,
And based on what you just said, it makes sense to label them differently because they want it to work what's best for them.
sure.
But let's say you're transitioning from one person to another person, like there must be an educational process there, is there? I mean,
Hugely. I mean,
yeah.
some accountants or some business owners who've been keeping their books, for instance, as just an example, I'll have folks come to me that have, you know, 700 expense accounts and they're tracking different vendors, for example, in different expense accounts. They'll have, here's my Shopify fees and my PayPal fees and where I would just say, credit card processing fees across the board, whether it's PayPal or Shopify or Venmo or any of those guys, they all get lumped into the same expense account.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, I would say, kind of a learning curve when I start working on a new client's books and usually some training involved, right? I can tell them, you've got this broken out into way too many accounts. Are you going to want to read this financial statement? No, it's 7 pages long. Of course you don't.
Yeah.
So let's simplify it
Yeah.
and really show you, if you want to know, if you're spending more on Shopify than you are PayPal, I can show you a different report that'll get that, but you don't need that on your P&L. So there is a lot of, how do I set this up to make it the most efficient?
Yeah.
That comes from trial and error, I think.
Okay. Very good. So, can you explain to me? I'm somewhat familiar with financials, profit and loss. I'm quite good with profit and loss, but the balance sheet. Can you relate the two of those together in a really simple way?
Yeah. So, I think everybody at profit and loss, it's how much income, how many expenses equals your net profit, your net income,
Yeah.
right? Your balance sheet tracks your account balances, including your cash accounts, your assets, as well as your liabilities, your debts. and then factoring all of that in, what is the net equity that your company has at this given moment? So this is like your balance sheet is like a snapshot
Hmm.
of the value and assets that your company has.
Hmm.
And the profit and loss is kind of like a moving, tracking progress of how your income and expenses have been flowing.
Okay.
Your net income from your profit and loss is the only part of the P&L that shows up on your balance sheet. So if you're looking down at the equity section,
Yeah.
say, here's all of my assets minus all of my liabilities, plus this year's net income equals the total equity that I have.
Okay. Okay.
Um, can I say a couple of geeky things about
I would,
about
well,
these?
yeah, of course, love to
Sure.
hear that.
Okay. Because I get questions about the balance sheet a lot, and business owners very I would say very often one of the biggest misunderstandings that business owners have is around the relationship between the balance sheet and the income statement or profit and loss. Those are interchangeable words. Um, the biggest thing that I see them not understand is, I get the question, man, this says that I made $20,000 this year, but I've got $100 in my bank account. Like, where did it all go? How is it possible this is all I've got? And the answer is that there are certain things that are actually happening on your balance sheet that don't show up on your P&L, but affect your cash balance. So your owner draws, for instance, when you just go take your credit card or your bank card and take $500 out of an ATM, that's never going to show up on your profit and loss, but it affects your bank account balance, right?
Right, 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 right.
Or you make a credit card payment or a major payment on an equipment loan that you've got,
Hmm.
and that is never going to hit your profit and loss. And
Right.
so you don't see a lot of the spending that's happening by just looking at your P&L.
Got it. Got it. So it looks profitable. However, you've got loans or um, whatever
Liabilities,
liabilities.
overdraws. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
That go against that profit, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But, from a tax standpoint, payment on a loan is not tax or is not a tax deduction.
Right.
An owner draw is not a tax deduction.
Hmm.
And so I see business owners so often run into this place where they're like, well, I don't have any money, so I must not be profitable, so I don't need to worry about taxes. Well, if you spent $50,000 this year paying down an equipment loan and, taking out owner draws, it doesn't matter that you don't have any money in your account. You're still going to owe taxes because all of that money that you took out wasn't an actual
Hmm.
business deduction. So understanding the relationship between these two documents, it can be important for business owners to not, you know, screw themselves at the end of the year when they're looking at, well, now
Yeah.
you've got a $10,000 tax bill and $100 in your account. How did that happen? It happened because you didn't understand the relationship between your financial statements.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like you know what you're doing when it comes to that connection. So, I mean, well, there's always something to learn, but I mean,
Sure.
you know, so anybody listening, this is your girl to
Yeah.
understand that. Now, cash flows. So
Yeah.
that's another thing. So there's the three statements, right?
Yep.
Which tell a pretty great story about a business.
Yes.
So
Yep.
cash flows, they're related to your receivable days, payable days, and inventory turns, correct? And okay, so the balance sheet is a snapshot once a year, but
Of whatever day.
can
Yeah.
you have that as a recurrent, like a revolving thing where it's always telling you what's going on? Is that
Yeah, of course. Of
okay?
course.
Okay.
Yeah, if your balance sheet, as long as your accounts are reconciled, your balance sheet gives you a snapshot as of right now. So,
Yeah.
when I do monthly accounting for clients, for instance, they get an income statement and a balance sheet every month, and both of those documents work together. The statement of cash flows is, in my opinion, kind of the translator between the two documents,
Okay.
because your statement of cash flows is going to show you where, how much of the cash in your business went to actual expenses that are deductible, giving you your net income, also how much of it went to financing activities like paying off loans and liabilities,
Hmm.
also how much went to equity activities like owner draws.
Hmm.
And so your statement of cash flows is often where folks will see, this is why my income statement says I've earned $20,000 so far this year, but my account balance says $100. Your statement of cash flows is going to tell you the story of how you got from the 20K to the $100.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
um, so how did you learn all that?
I drank from a fire hose for 5 years. Like, like really, really, that is the answer. I mean, when I got into this industry, I had taken one accounting class. And I requested the internship at the firm that I worked for because it was clear that I wasn't going to learn enough fast enough going through school. Like, put me in there, let me start doing some books. And it was just nonstop. And then, 3 years in, COVID hit
Oh.
and everything, that got turned on its head. I mean, the thing about my industry is it changes overnight. And
Hmm.
so it really is like drinking from a fire hose every single day. There's so much to learn. There's so many different ways that people operate their businesses.
Hmm.
There's so many different ways to do it. If you're a huge business versus a very small business, you do sales tax, you don't do sales tax, you got payroll, you don't have payroll, and I love the firm that I worked for, because I got to learn so much. I got to
Yeah.
see, some people who get into accounting, they get a job at one of these huge accounting, big five accounting firms, and they do all accounts receivable. And they know
Hmm.
accounts receivable inside and out. They could tell you everything you want to know about accounts receivable,
Hmm.
but they can't tell you about accounts payable. They can't get in there with your account reconciliations and your expense coding.
Yeah.
And, what I appreciate about my experience is that I've really gotten to see all of it in a
Yeah.
painstaking way that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it grew me
Yeah. Cool.
quickly.
Well, that's good. Jumping in is always, in my opinion, the best way to
Me too. Me
learn.
too. Me too.
So bigger than the accounting, is there systems, digital systems that kind of can funnel into that in a business that you've seen? Like, is there like ERPs, for example? Like, have you seen any that work really well when it comes to, payroll integrating with that and inventory and those sorts of things? And I have my own experience with this, and a company I worked for bought an ERP, but none of that stuff integrated. So it was a nightmare. We bought something we thought we were getting, but we didn't get it. And I'm just wondering if there is anything out there that you've seen that will integrate those together,
Just really ERP. Give me
like
the
a enterprise resource. Oh, I don't know what the P stands for. Management, basically.
okay. Um, so I don't know specifically that, like the plugin or the integration for us, but I can say that these cloud accounting softwares are prioritizing third-party plugins, like Xero, for instance. And I'll focus on that because I know that's
Sure,
I'm
sure.
I'm certified on QuickBooks as well, but I don't like it, so I don't talk about it as much.
Fair enough.
So on Xero, they prioritize third-party plugins because they're aware that they're not going to be the best at everything. And they understand that a piece of software that tries to do everything often fails at
Okay,
more things than they win at. And
right.
so they have created a emphasis on creating partnerships and working on integrations with platforms like Gusto for payroll, for instance, or like Stripe for credit card processing. Um, like they've got inventory providers and partners and recommended softwares if you've got different types of business structures. They integrate with Shopify if you run e-commerce programs, things like that.
Mhm.
And I think that for any technology to be successful in the world today, you've really got to be able to do that super well. Like I see a lot of these softwares that try to do it all. And I do find that they end up, doing a couple of things really well. And then on the things that they don't do well, it's just infuriating because then on top of not having a great solution themselves, they're not really set up to plug in well with the people that do have a good solution for it. So I have a lot of respect for companies like Xero that, make that a priority.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's nice to hear a company that doesn't say they can do everything, right?
Yeah.
It's respectable, you know?
Yeah.
So
100%.
what don't you like about QuickBooks? Everything.
Um,
No, but give me some
no,
specific.
not ever. They have done, look, QuickBooks really led the charge on putting bookkeeping in the business owner's hands and taking it out of the ivory tower of the accounting industry. And that I do appreciate. I love that more business owners know about bookkeeping because QuickBooks made it accessible.
Mhm.
That being said, functionally, I think that their system is more complicated than it has to be. And I know that because I use a system that is nowhere near as complicated.
Okay.
So they, I think that there are things that they could do more easily. There are funny, fickle things about the system, like the business owner's view of the dashboard and the accountant's view of the dashboard are different. So if I want to sit down and train a client on, let me show you how to reconcile your bank account and run financial statements so that you don't need me to do it, right? I am explaining how to use a portal that literally looks different to them than it
Hmm.
does to me. So
Yeah.
I've got to, open up their view of it and then poke around a view that I don't know well myself because it's not the view and that kind of a thing, I'm just like, why do they do it that way? And I think overall, if I could sum it up in one, I feel like QuickBooks has misled business owners to think that they can do their bookkeeping themselves with their system, when in reality, messes are very easy to make in QuickBooks. I would say easier than they are to make in Xero.
Okay.
And a lot of times they're harder to clean up and harder for the business owner to catch. So I end up coming in 3 or 4 years down the road and cleaning up an accounting system that is all over the place because the business owner thought from the get-go that they could just do their books themselves. And I think that Xero has done a much better job of, like at every step, hey, we recommend that you work with an accountant or bookkeeper here. Like, are you sure you want to enter a manual journal entry? We really recommend that only, having a high level of accounting knowledge that you do this. Those types of things, I
Yeah.
think you really should reinforce with business owners that yes, you can do the bookkeeping, but you should make sure that you know what you're doing. And there are some things that you probably shouldn't do unless you're an expert in the industry.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
how is this going to play out in your financial statements? If you can't answer that question, don't do the action,
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that sometimes in companies that I've looked at. It's like they're not allocating things in the right places. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but certainly I've seen that. It's like
Sure.
you're having people in your cost of goods sold that shouldn't be,
Sure.
without thinking that
Sure.
that's going to affect I mean, that affects everything. It affects how the business, what you're learning from the cost of goods sold, right?
Right.
And your efficiency. So there you go, QuickBooks, get your shit together.
Yeah. Get your shit and stop recommending stop recommending the accounts. The one of the things I think makes messes so easily in QuickBooks is um when if you use that system, anybody who's listening to this who's used the system knows exactly what I'm talking about here. When you're coding on your bank feed and you see like this is the date and the payee and the amount that I spent and this is the account that QuickBooks is recommending I code it to, the account is so often wrong, and they make suggestions even if a transaction like that has never been coded before. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times you end up creating rules that every time you've got a Venmo deposit, for instance,
Uh-huh.
it gets coded as a transfer from uncategorized asset.
Oh.
Well, if the only income you've got coming in from Venmo is sales, then you can code it to sales every time. Otherwise, you got to reconcile this uncategorized asset account on top of it. And it's just I know that that's kind of like higher level stuff, but when I go in there and I look at,
Hmm.
people's books and I see uncategorized assets and, you know, the undeposited funds accounts with hundreds of thousands of dollars in balances, I know that it's largely the system
Yes.
that has been misused, and QuickBooks just makes it way too easy to misuse it.
Okay.
That's my opinion of it.
Okay.
But
All right. So everybody that has QuickBooks, Stacey is available.
I am available. I work on zero. I work on zero,
I
just
know.
so you know.
So I think it's a good segue to, what do you look for besides QuickBooks and a client? Like, what is it that you want to see as some indicators that you want to work with somebody? Because I assume, you've got some self-respect. You don't work with everybody. What are the types of people you do work with?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I I really love working with people that are self-motivated and want to learn this stuff. You don't have to want to be an accountant, but wanting to be, like in charge and confident managing your business's finances, that quality is so important, I think, to getting the most value out of working with me. Um, being like detail oriented, and that like if I send an email with 5 action steps,
Hmm.
whether or not you've completed them. It's not
Hmm.
like it goes into the ether and you never look at it and then you email me next week, asking for the same thing I just told you those
Yep.
kinds of like
Yep.
you're on top of your stuff enough to take the actions with the guidance that I'm providing, and you want to learn it. Because that, I don't just do people's books. I really help business owners feel in charge and on top of their finances, and like they're making smart decisions
Yeah.
when they spend money and how they save it and how they pay themselves. And for that, I need an active participant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think
Yeah,
accountants can always be adding more value. Well, everybody can, but we're,
sure.
t- we're talking about accountants today. So adding value is where it's at, where that's the economy we're in. Um, and that's the additional things you add, which is the educational part of it. How does that look when, how do you educate them? Is it a one-on-one, or do you have like a training program, or what? How does that
Yeah.
work?
Um, yes. The answer is yes. So there is um there's some one-on-one training on like the nuts and bolts of how to manage your accounting software,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I do take the approach that, most of what gets done in your books can be done in-house, and probably should. Having you as the business owner know what type of expenses to code these as and
Hmm.
how to do that in your books is really helpful for staying on top of what you're spending. And if I'm doing all of that, it's a lot harder for you to stick to the roadmap that we put together about how you're
Sure.
going to spend.
Sure.
So there's also what I'm putting together and what I'm launching right now is a 2-day profit accelerator program, and it's
Nice.
where I'm teaching business owners how to quickly implement Profit First, which is a cash management system,
Awesome.
in their companies. And so that also happens one-on-one for now. It will be a group training down the road, but one-on-one for now, where I'm just walking you through, where are you now? How are you currently spending your money?
Yeah.
Where do you want to be? And what would that look like? And then now, how do we, over the next, however many months, get you from A to B?
Yeah.
What changes need to be put in place? What systems need to be put in place? What knowledge gaps need to be filled? And then I work with the client to execute.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant. That's awesome. Um, because sometimes it's just going through the process, right? It's not, we all have these things. We know we want to get to where we need to get to, but it's
Yeah,
like those little steps in between that is,
yeah,
at least for me, that's the hard part. I know where everything can be. It's just getting there, right?
yeah.
So let's talk about profit first. I talked to Rocky. He was one of my guests. Do you know Rocky?
No.
Rocky. Oh, he's a profit first guy, and
Okay.
he's pretty great. And um, pretty out there, like not out there up here. I mean, like out there,
Yeah,
he's everywhere,
out
right?
there doing stuff. Yeah, yeah.
And I learned a lot from him, but I'm curious your perspective on Profit First. What got you interested in it? Where did that start? And what is it about it that is really good for a business owner?
Yeah. So I came across it. Um, it, I would describe it as like grandma's envelope system for businesses. And grandma's envelope system works. Like
Mm-hmm.
what really, turned me on about it is I turned my personal finances around using a similar system, and I had never seen anything like that for businesses until I came across Profit First. And when I saw this, small plates mentality. Let me just put what is available for operating expenses into one account, and then I know exactly how much money I have to spend on operating expenses. That simplification,
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes, you don't have to be a numbers person to know that you've got enough money in your bank account to cover this type of expense or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love it for how much it has simplified and taken the guesswork out of how much should I pay myself? Can I afford to hire a new person? Is now the right time to, buy this piece of equipment? How much do I need to have set aside for taxes? How much should I be saving for the future? What do I do if I've got a drop in revenue? Like all of those questions are
Yeah,
so easily answered with one system. So that's what I like about it.
that's cool. Okay, so let's break it down a little bit further. Because I mean, the name of it is Profit First, right?
Yeah.
So you decide in the first place, this is the amount of profit I want to make.
Yep.
And then you kind of organize from there, correct? Like you've got expenses and you can break down those expenses in that pot of this is my budget and I can't go past this, right? And then
Right.
I've got all these different jars or envelopes, like you say, of those are my budgets and I can't go past those. And if you do go past those, it's an indicator to something. Is that correct?
Right. Yes. If you, so it's to kind of back up a step, it's all based on percentages. So
Okay.
a lot of people, when they're looking at what is my budget, you just kind of throw a number out there. Like how much money do you have to spend on operating expenses? If I asked any of your listeners right now, some of them, have worked through a budget and they could answer that very concrete. Others will say,
Yeah.
I don't know,
What's a budget?
what's in my bank account? Yeah, right, right. And so Profit First says, well, no, like there's healthy percentages that you should be spending on operating expenses and setting aside for taxes and paying yourself as the owner, the most important employee of your company. There are certain amounts that you should be setting aside for the future. What if there is a revenue dip and you need to dip into an emergency fund? We want to be stashing towards that. And so Profit First says, let's take these healthy allocation percentages and just say of every revenue dollar that comes in, this percent is set aside for profit. This percent is set aside for taxes. This percent is paid to the owner. This percent is spent on operating expenses. And your goal as a business owner, and 9 times out of 10, when people have an issue with this system, it's because their operating expenses are too high. If you can't keep your operating expenses within the amount that's allotted for the revenue that you're bringing in, it's an indicator that you're overspending somewhere. And the solution to that can be anything from negotiate with your vendors, adjust the terms of your repayment on things. It can be that your accounts receivable process is off. So you're spending more money to make the sale than you're bringing in at the time, and you're having to dip into, revenue, or you're having to dip into dollars that are set aside for other things. Let's adjust your accounts receivable. Or maybe it is that you just have too much money going out the door. So let's
Mm-hmm.
see what's actually necessary, what's generating revenue, and if it's not necessary, then let's cut it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And what I really love about the system is that it does force you to grow and be more mindful. If you overspend, it's like, well, what am I paying for that is not necessary, you
Mhm.
know? So yeah, those are some of the things that I like about it. I do One of the things that I do with my clients, is we take that same formula and we answer a couple of other questions, such as, if let's just say my owner's compensation percentage is 30% and I want to make $100,000 a year, how much do I need to generate in revenue a year in order for me to meet that? And you can back into that number. If you say, look, I've cut every single possible expense, and I know without a doubt that my minimum operating budget is $50,000 a month. I know that. Well, if 50% of your income needs to go to operating expenses, you can back into exactly what you need to make for revenue. And so you can start to ask questions about, like, instead of chasing revenue, thinking that, man, if I just get more sales, then I'll have
Mm.
more money in the bank, when usually operating expenses just catch up with it. You can be very clear and concrete. Like, I know if I make $100,000 this month, I will meet my operating expense budget.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah.
Um, so it simplifies even questions like that.
Very cool. That's that's pretty powerful to a business owner. And what gets them to the point, like, how we always get the business owner and they, oh, I've been doing it this way forever and I'm happy with that. I guess that's not an ideal client, or is there any, at what point do people decide that maybe it's change that needs to happen? Is it maybe a change in management? Is it change in the person? Like what have you seen? Because
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great question. I think that there are a few different places that people arrive. One, and probably the most obvious, is something needs to change. I'm at my wit's end and I can't keep doing this. I've met cash flow crisis after cash flow crisis after cash flow crisis, and I am simply just exhausted with being this stressed out. I
Hmm.
need to figure out how to do this better. So those clients, come to me because they can't keep doing what they've been doing.
Hmm.
Um, I'd say another group of business owners would come at it more from a, like, things are going fine, but I know that we're not making the progress that we could be making as a company. I have these ideas of what I want to be able to give to the world, and I feel like I'm constantly, I end up putting out fires, or I end up just getting by, and I want to be thriving. I want to know that in 10 years my company is going to be an asset that I can step away from
Yeah.
and it can run itself. And I can't see that happening right now. So what do I do to start planning for that? I think Profit First is an excellent solution for people in that position. And then the third place I think is really around personal growth. Like, this system does grow you. It
Hmm.
it forces you to look at your money in a more mature and intentional way. And so when I come across business owners who are like, I could keep doing what I'm doing, but really I want to understand why I'm spending what I'm spending.
Yeah.
And what if I could build a multi-million dollar business, just by managing what I've got
Yeah.
better. Like,
Yeah.
teach me how to do that. Let's figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
So I think anyone in any of those camps is a great fit for it.
Very cool. Very cool. And just to shout out to myself, this also adds value to your business. So when you're ready to sell it,
Yeah.
it's worth more money, right? Because
Yeah.
it's at some point everybody's got to sell their business or whatever. I mean,
Right.
you can just let it fall apart, or but what happens is that the government takes a lot in taxes, so it's always better to sell it. And
Sure.
so yeah,
Can.
all of
Yeah.
these things that you're talking about,
Or
and,
like, let's say you don't even want to sell it. Let's say you want to be able to step away from it.
and
You
somebody
want to
can run it.
know, yeah, you can now hire a manager. And one of the things that happens, in the profit first model, as you can see, as the business gets, larger, and as it grows in revenue, and as it, you can see the business owner becomes less involved,
Yeah.
and owner's compensation percentage gets taken down. And so at
Sure.
some point, my goal is, at some point, my business is going to operate without me, and I'm going to take my profit distributions,
So
and there'll be a team managing it.
in the spirit of that, yeah, you've got to have all these things in place before you can step away, right? And
Right,
but because somebody has to come in or promoted from within to
right, right, right.
manage. these
Right.
things, and it's a lot easier to do if it's in a system
A
like what
hundred
you're
percent.
talking about. So cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you work remotely. Do you do any in-person stuff or
Yeah, I do. So I live in Colorado.
yeah.
Most of the in-person stuff that I do is in Denver.
Okay.
So clients who are listening from Denver, that would be a really easy one to do.
Yeah.
Um, it's not an official thing yet, but really when I think about what my dream for my business is to actually start going to businesses,
Yeah.
who want some
Love it.
in-person implementation,
Yes.
spending a couple of weeks to a month in the business with them, helping them implement this entire system,
Yeah.
and then doing, virtual consulting or in-person check-ins on a regular basis
Yeah.
after that. So yeah, I mean, depending on what clients need and are willing to pay for, I am flexible. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that's one of my dreams too, is to just
Yeah.
travel around and help people out.
Yeah.
Because
Huge.
there's, I mean, there's so much to see out there, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, serving people is rewarding, and
it is.
actually adding value and seeing them change their lives is exciting. So, and
Yeah.
to segue into it, you've got a culture, or not a culture, I guess you created your own culture, but you are a person that cares about people just based on your history. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? Why you were a mentor to youth, and you know, um,
Mm.
youth at risk and ending the silence, which was around mental health and stuff, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah, yeah,
a
it
lot of
was.
that stuff's near and dear to my heart as well. And I'm just curious, why did you do those things?
Yeah. I've got goosebumps, because this is really where my heart lives. I had a really tough time when I was a teenager and a young adult. And I didn't see there ever being a day where I wasn't having a tough time. I couldn't imagine a life where I was happy and confident and satisfied with myself and looked forward to the day. And I remember when I was in high school having the thought, if I ever get out of this, I'm going to help other people get out of this. And
Cool.
after I graduated from college is really when I discovered how much of my life was really in my hands, and that there were so many behaviors and choices and habits and things that I could do that would support the mental health and the sense of self that I wanted.
Hmm.
And I built a foundation for myself. And, as soon as I started making those moves, it was like, okay, cool. Let's take this to people. Let's take this to people. And my heart is for teenagers. I love young people. I love working with young people more than anything in the world. I've got a niece who's about to be 13, and I'm like most excited for the chapter coming. Her mom is like, oh God, she's about to be in high school. I'm like, she's about to be in high school. Like, this is when they're my people, because this is when I understand
Yes.
them the most,
Yeah.
the challenges that they're dealing with. And so, yeah, I want to be in the world showing that y- you can build happiness. If I can build happiness and a life that I'm proud of and a life that I'm in love with, you
Mm.
can too. And like, let's just, work on the mindset and the habits and the way that you need to talk to yourself and the way you need to look at your mistakes,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so that you can cultivate that. So that's where it all came from.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, that's the struggles are what makes us who we are. And that's so cool. Well, thank you very much, Stacey.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Same.
Absolutely. And I hope that we can
Same.
do some things outside of this episode. You
Yeah.
never know, right? Um, any recommended things that people can go look at? Is there a book or something that,
Yeah.
because you talk about mindset, and that is so on point. And I agree. It's all about in between here and taking
Yeah.
the responsibility for your own actions and not blaming others.
Yeah.
And you can achieve
Yep.
whatever you want to. And I love to
Yep.
hear that you have a dream for your business, because
Yeah.
I believe having a dream is
Yeah,
what helps get us up in the morning, do the things that we do. So, and everybody's got one. It's just some people are afraid to talk about it or admit it to themselves.
sure.
So, is there anything that will liberate people's mindset?
There's so many things. There's so many things. Um, yeah, mindset wise, I would say probably the most impactful thing that I've done is landmark education. The Landmark Forum was a course that I did back in 2014, and I would attribute that to the way I'm able to acknowledge life as it is and just accept it and choose it and move forward. And I think a lot of people get stuck on and hung up on things that don't go the way that we want it and the way that we don't like how it turned out, things we don't like about ourselves that we want to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that program for me is what kind of allowed me to take a step back and look at, this is just the way that it is. Okay, cool. Well, I choose it the way that it is, and I'm going to move forward with what I'm committed to. So that would be one. I'd say that probably the most impactful book that I've read on mindset is actually I'm finishing it right now. It's The Untethered Soul. I
Okay.
don't know if you've heard of that.
I have not.
Excellent. I've done meditation and mindfulness work for a decade, and I've never come across something that's so just plainly and non-judgmentally and matter-of-factly lays out how simple life really is. So that is a really good one. Yeah, I'd say those two are my top picks.
Okay. I'll check it out.
Yes.
I hope the
Yes.
listeners do too. Stacey,
Yeah.
it's been a pleasure, as I said. And where can people find you?
They can find me on, so I've got my website is the THESLC group.co. And then anyone who's interested in my Profit First coaching, I've actually got a 2-day profit accelerator program that I'm running. It's the number, dayprofitaccelerator.com. And you can hop on there and book a call and we can chat about what the program is and yeah,
Awesome.
get it going.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, I'll put those links in the description.
Yeah, sounds great.
All
Sounds
right.
great.
All right, Stacey. We'll talk to you
Great.
soon. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.